I'm all for offshore oil if we don't change our lifestyle. I'm all for offshore oil, you know, if we're going to keep playing the same old game. Unless we change, then offshore oil is not an issue. It's an issue only if we change and only if we go to alternative sources of energy, less damaging sources.
Where was the environmental movement when Lilco was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on an ad campaign to sell electric heat? For the last 4 years, even during the energy shortage.
We were writing letters to the editor and educating, and it doesn't happen. They still keep...
Did anyone think of intervening in the public service hearings at that time and insisting that that item of the budget be justified?
Because you're talking to the normal environmentalists, like the majority of us here are people who work on another job, and we do it in our spare time, and we're fighting corporations.
And it costs a little bit of money to bring lawsuits and intervene on the federal level. Where does the money come from in these spare time?
If we go back to maybe where the opening of the program, the question of whether we're going to succeed or not is probably one we can't answer. But we can worry a great deal about how we go about trying to solve the problems that we see. Maybe, in fact, we are just banging on this castle, and we're going to lose ultimately. The point is that what we really have to do is to figure out real ways of solving these problems. And one of the ways that has been done is that EDF has gone to public utility commissions, as Victor has suggested, and asked for a change in the way that we use our electricity. That is to say, we go after peak load pricing, which means that we could cause electricity that's used at peak times to cost more than electricity used at other times. This tends to shift the peak off the peak. It cuts down the amount of capacity that you need, cuts down the amount of electricity that is used. It changes lifestyles. Now, it's that kind of specific action, which was a legal action in a sense, which won in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has accepted the arguments that the Environmental Defense Fund has presented there. Now, whether those arguments will spread to the rest of the utility companies in the country remains to be seen. It's going to need additional pushing. It's going to need additional effort. This is really what I was speaking to when I talked about the education aspect of it. I don't think for a moment that simply writing letters to the editors, you know, straight off is a very effective way of doing something. I think what you have to do is you have to find a place where you get very high leverage, get your arguments built strongly and firmly in some good forum, and then you have to spread out from there. And that spreading out includes public education. One of the points of the Long Island water case that EDF is initiating is one of the objectives will be a legal victory, but one of the other objectives is to try to educate people and get them to discuss the whole question of where our water is, where it comes from, where it goes, what we're doing with it. That is a very important question.
The kids that you're at school with, you have a reputation for turning kids from Belport and Brookhaven into raving ecologists. They're called Cooley kids. How do you do it? What's the mechanism you do with those kids?
I didn't know they were called that.
Yeah.
They're good kids. Why? I think well, I don't know, really. I take them out into the environment. I mean, we go out and canoe the Carmens River. There's been a program recently which indicated that the government officials have been responsible for saving the Carmens River. Well, it was largely townspeople, local, individual people. It included some of my students, and some of my students were leaders in that, but it also included League of Women Voter Peoples. It included townspeople, naturalists. It included a whole range of people who were interested in the Carmens River, and they went out and fought for it. Now, they got cooperation from various political officials, but the motivation came from the people who lived in that particular area.
You have to start on a local level.
That's right.
Yeah. There's a dramatic example in water in Montauk. 2.5 or 3 years ago, at the time that the concerned citizens of Montauk groups were organizing, the master plan for Suffolk County envisioned a population of 3.5 million people, and that included 1 million people on both forks. Mr. Koppelman and Mr. Flynn were eventually forced to wake up to the ecological reality that there isn't enough water for 3.5 million people on eastern Long Island. The town of Huntington, when the offshore pipeline sewage outfall was proposed, went to court and got the original temporary stay. Now that's ripened into a rather monumental lawsuit that I understand the Environmental Defense Fund is bringing.
The Environmental Defense Fund is bringing a lawsuit against the Environmental Protection Agency for the policy of funding treatment plants here with outfalls Now, our water only comes from this big sponge that we all live on. And if we treat this water as something that we can throw away, we will have no water.
Do you think there's a chance?
Do I think there's a very good chance? Of course.
There's always a chance. I mean, again, taking a small thing, but showing how it can be developed. For years, we have fought to protect Route 25A for its whole length. And we finally, this year, through a political ploy, were able to sponsor legislation and get it passed, creating a historic and scenic route, merely because of the fact that we came up with the idea that we tied in with the bicentennial, because of the fact that this had historic precedent. And it got passed. Now, recently, in the town of Brookville, for example, the Department of Transportation started cutting down some fine old trees along Route 25A. So I wrote a letter to Claude Berenger in Washington and told him about it and told him this was on the route and therefore they couldn't do it. So they wrote back and said, from now on, before they plan anything of that sort, they will take it up to the local municipalities. Now, that's just a small thing, but I mean, if you plan it properly, you can accomplish results.
I think we're going to win on some small skirmishes of that kind. But I'd be prone at this point to recommend a more radical reaction. I don't have any faith in the political decision process at this time. It may eventually wake up to our needs, but I don't have any faith in it this time. I would recommend that people, number one, don't vote. It only encourages them. And number two, get ready for a taxpayer revolt. Stop paying their taxes. And number three, radically modify their own lifestyles together in groups, wherever they are, as radical as that sounds. And number four, wait until they put politicians up who will devise an economic program or system that enhances and enriches our ecology and does not exploit.
I must disagree. People must vote because this is where it's at. If you can get your politicians to respond, and you can now, and I must take exception to the fact that Western Suffolk is lost. I don't believe that. I live in Western Suffolk, and I don't think it's
That's the only hope.
and I believe that the towns and your local politicians are the people that you can influence. And hopefully, if we get all the politicians on our side and all the people on our side, we could do something about it.
Well, by that time, we'll all be living on Mars,
I don't think so.
I don't think that. I take a very dim view of whether we can save Suffolk. All I can say, Eastern Suffolk, is it will probably be better than Western Suffolk and Manhattan. But it's going to be pretty lousy if all the plans that are going through now, from superhighways to sewage systems, extend out to the very tip end of Montauk.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening. In our next show, the last of the series, we'll examine the proposition running through all our programs, can Suffolk be saved?